The old rocking chair creaked softly as Grandma Leaner sat by the window, the fading sunlight painting her wrinkled hands gold. Outside, the autumn leaves drifted down the quiet Tennessee street, the same street she'd walked for over 40 years. Her voice, soft yet steady, broke the silence as she said, "People see me as just an old woman now, but they don't know the story behind these hands, the sacrifices, the love, the pain." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening as if holding a lifetime of untold stories. "I came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of dreams," she whispered. America had promised her freedom, but freedom came with a price she never imagined she'd have to pay. And tonight, as she began to tell her story, it wasn't just about her life. It was about every heart that ever loved, lost, and kept going anyway. "I was just 22 when I first landed in America," Grandma began, her voice trembling with the weight of memory. "The air smelled different, strange, cold, and full of hope. I remember holding Robert's hand so tightly at the airport, afraid that if I let go, I'd lose everything. They had only $200 between them, two suitcases, and a dream of a better life. But dreams, she said, don't come true without struggle. Robert worked night shifts at a factory, while she cleaned houses during the day, barely crossing paths except for a few tired smiles at dawn. They didn't complain because every dollar saved meant one step closer to stability. Still, there were nights she cried quietly in their small one-room apartment, missing her parents, her old life, her language. But I told myself, she said softly, pain is temporary, purpose isn't. Because sometimes the strongest people aren't the loudest ones, they're the ones who suffer in silence and still choose to believe in tomorrow. The early years in America were a blur of survival. Grandma Leaner worked endless shifts, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, sewing clothes by candlelight to earn a few extra dollars, and learning English one word at a time from the television. "I used to repeat words I heard on the screen," she laughed faintly, "and sometimes I'd say them wrong, but I kept trying." Robert would come home exhausted, his shirt soaked in sweat and metal dust from the factory. Still, they found happiness in the little things, sharing coffee at midnight, saving coins in a glass jar, and dreaming about a home they would someday call their own. But beneath the laughter, there was always a quiet ache, the feeling of being outsiders in a world that never really welcomed them. Her voice broke as she asked, "Have you ever felt invisible? Like you're there working, loving, giving, but nobody really sees you?" Because that's how it felt to live in a country full of people and still feel completely alone. As the years passed, life began to settle, at least on the surface. They finally bought a small house in a quiet corner of Tennessee, with a creaky porch and a big oak tree out front. It wasn't much, Grandma smiled, but to us it was everything. Soon after, their daughter Lily was born, the light of their lives, the reason all those sleepless nights felt worth it. Eleanor quit one of her jobs to stay home and care for her, while Robert worked even harder, sometimes pulling double shifts. "We wanted her to have everything we never did," Grandma said, her eyes misting. But with every year that passed, the distance between dreams and reality grew wider. Bills piled up, rent increased, and their health began to waver. Yet no matter how heavy life became, she held on to one belief that love could hold a family together, even in the darkest of storms. But what happens when the very love you built your world on begins to slip away piece by piece? When Lily turned 10, Robert fell ill. What started as a stubborn cough soon turned into something far worse, a diagnosis that shattered their little world. "He tried to stay strong," Grandma whispered, "but I could see it in his eyes, he was scared." The factory job that had sustained them for years now became a memory, and hospital visits replaced their evenings together. Eleanor picked up extra cleaning work, hiding her tears in between mopping floors and folding strangers' laundry. She prayed every night, asking God for just one more day with him. "Some nights," she said, "I'd hold his hand and promise I'd take care of Lily no matter what." When Robert passed away that winter, the house felt colder than the snow outside. Yet, even in her grief, she went back to work the next day, not because she was strong, but because she had no choice. And sometimes, life doesn't ask if you're ready to be strong, it just forces you to be. After Robert's passing, the silence in the house became unbearable. It wasn't just quiet, Grandma said softly, it was empty. Every creak of the floor reminded her of him, his laughter, his humming, even the way he used to leave his boots by the door. But she didn't have time to grieve the way she wanted to. There was rent to pay, a child to feed, and a life that refused to pause. "I used to look at Lily and see pieces of him in her smile," she recalled. That smile became her reason to keep going. She took on 2 jobs, sometimes 3, cleaning during the day and working at a diner at night. The world only saw a tired woman, but inside she carried the strength of 1,000 storms. "I wasn't living for myself anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I was living for the promise I made beside his hospital bed. Because when love leaves your side, sometimes the only way to survive is to keep walking for the one who can't anymore." Years passed and Lily grew into a bright, ambitious young woman, the kind of daughter any mother would be proud of. She was smart, outspoken, and full of dreams that stretched far beyond their small Tennessee town. I wanted her to fly, Grandma said, her voice thick with both pride and pain, but I didn't realize how far those wings would take her from me. Lily earned a scholarship to a big university, and though Alina smiled and clapped as she boarded the bus, her heart quietly broke. For the first time in decades, the house felt truly empty, no footsteps, no laughter, just the echoes of love she'd poured into every corner. I told myself this was what all the sacrifices were for, she whispered. But when night came, I'd sit by her old room and wonder, did she know how much I missed her? Because sometimes, giving your child the wings to fly means learning how to live without their shadow beside you. When Lily left, Alina thought she'd finally have time to rest, but rest never came. The long days turned into longer nights, and loneliness became her quiet companion. At first, she said, I'd wait for her calls every Sunday. I'd sit by the phone, holding my cup of tea, smiling before it even rang. But weeks began to stretch into months, and the calls came less often. Lily was busy, studying, working, building her own life, and Alina understood. Still, she couldn't help the ache in her chest. Every time the phone stayed silent, it felt like the distance between them grew a little wider. She'd walk through the house at night, touching Lily's childhood drawings on the wall, her trophies, her old teddy bear. I raised her to be strong, Grandma whispered, tears gathering in her eyes, but I never prepared myself for what it feels like when your baby doesn't need you anymore. Because no one warns you that the hardest part of motherhood is learning how to let go. As the years went on, Alina watched life move faster than she could keep up with. Technology changed, neighborhoods changed, even the faces in her church changed, but she remained, frozen in time, holding on to the memories that once kept her warm. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, she said, watching the sun go down and realizing I had no one to share it with anymore. The laughter that used to fill her evenings was now replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of an old wall clock. Once in a while, Lily would visit short trips, always in a rush, always with a phone in her hand. She'd hug me, say she missed me, Grandma said, but her eyes were somewhere else. Still, she never complained. She just smiled and cooked Lily's favorite meal every time, hoping each visit might last a little longer than the last. But sometimes, love doesn't fade because of distance. It fades because time teaches us how to live without what we once couldn't. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, the wind howled outside, and the house felt heavier than usual. The phone rang, Lily's name flashing on the screen. Alina's heart leapt. Mama, Lily said softly, I wanted to talk. Her voice sounded different, tired, distant. After a pause, she continued, I think it's best if you stay there in Tennessee for a while. I'm busy and it's hard for me to visit right now. Alina froze, her breath catching. She forced a smile, though her eyes filled with tears. Of course, sweetheart, she whispered. I understand. After the call ended, she sat by the window, staring at the moonlight spilling across the empty table. The silence in the room was deafening, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her solitude. Still, she whispered a prayer for her daughter's happiness, even as her heart quietly broke. Because sometimes, love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go, even when every piece of you wants to stay. Days turned into weeks, and Alina learned to live with the quiet. She began to fill her days with little routines, tending to her rose garden, watching the birds that gathered near her porch, and writing letters she never sent. It's funny, she said softly, how silence can become a kind of company. Every morning, she'd make 2 cups of tea, one for herself and one for Robert, as if he still sat beside her. Old habits never really die, she smiled sadly. But behind that smile was an ocean of memories, the life she built, the love she lost, the daughter she missed. Sometimes she'd whisper into the empty room, You did your best, Alina. It was her way of reminding herself that even if no one said it, she had lived bravely. And yet every night before bed, she'd still glance at the phone just in case it rang. Because hope, no matter how fragile, has a way of whispering, maybe tomorrow. One morning, a small package arrived at her doorstep. Inside was a store-bought blanket and a note that read, Stay warm, Mama. Love, Lily. Alina's hands trembled as she held it. For a moment, her heart leapt. Her daughter had thought of her. She pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes, whispering a thank you to the heavens. But as she unfolded the blanket, she noticed the price tag still attached. It wasn't personal, not handmade, not filled with the love she once stitched into every sweater she'd made for Lily. It was convenient, and that tiny detail, that simple tag, cut deeper than words ever could. I know she cares, Alina murmured, but love feels different when it doesn't come from the heart anymore. She folded the blanket neatly and placed it on her bed, untouched, as if waiting for meaning to return. Because sometimes love doesn't disappear, it just forgets how to be personal. That winter was one of the coldest Alina could remember. The snow fell endlessly, covering her porch and garden in a thick white silence. She used to love winter, the hot cocoa, the sound of the fireplace, the warmth of family around her, but now it only reminded her of what she'd lost. I used to complain about the noise, she said with a soft laugh. Now I'd give anything to hear it again. Some nights she'd sit by the window, watching the snowflakes fall, imagining Lily's laughter echoing through the halls once more. She thought about calling her daughter, but always stopped herself. I don't want to be a burden, she whispered to the empty room. So instead, she wrote Lily letters she never mailed, each one ending with I'm proud of you. It was her way of staying close, even when miles and time had built walls between them. Because sometimes a mother's love speaks loudest in the silence she chooses to keep. One Sunday afternoon, Alina gathered the courage to attend church again after months of isolation. The same wooden pews, the same hymns, but everything felt different. Faces had changed, and time had quietly replaced the familiar with the unknown. A young couple sat beside her with their little girl, and as the child giggled softly during the sermon, Alina's heart ached in the sweetest way. She remembered Lily sitting beside her years ago, her tiny hands clutching a Bible too big for her lap. She used to whisper the hymns, Grandma said with a faint smile, as if she was singing secrets to God. After the service, people greeted her kindly, but their warmth couldn't fill the emptiness she carried home. She made soup that evening, humming the same tune Lily once loved. And as the clock ticked in the background, she whispered, It's strange how even love can get quiet with time. Because sometimes the loudest echoes in life come from the places love used to live. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the Tennessee hills, Alina sat on her porch wrapped in a shawl, watching the horizon fade into gold. She had spent decades chasing moments, raising a child, building a home, surviving storms, but in that quiet glow, she realized how swiftly it had all passed. The laughter, the tears, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, they had become fragments of a story only she remembered in full. We give everything, she murmured, and all we ask for is to be remembered. A tear rolled down her cheek as she traced the wrinkles on her hands, each one a memory, each line a chapter written in love and pain. Somewhere deep inside, she still hoped Lily would call, not out of duty, but out of love, the kind that once made life worth all the struggles. Because when you give your whole life to love, you pray someone somewhere remembers your story. That night, Alina dreamed of her old house, the one filled with laughter, warmth, and the scent of apple pie cooling by the window. In the dream, Lily was small again, running across the kitchen floor, her little feet tapping against the tiles. Mama, look, I made you something, she said, holding up a crayon drawing of the two of them holding hands. Alina woke up with tears streaming down her face, clutching her pillow as if it were her daughter. The ache in her chest wasn't just loneliness, it was nostalgia, the bittersweet pain of remembering love that once felt infinite. She walked to her dresser, opened a drawer, and pulled out that same drawing she'd saved all those years ago. The paper had yellowed, but the colors, the love, had never faded, because time can age the paper, but never the memories written in love. Days turned into weeks, and winter slowly began to fade. One morning, Alina woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window, a melody she hadn't heard in months. She stepped out onto her porch and felt the soft sunlight on her face, the kind that gently whispers, You're still here. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. Life, she realized, had taken so much from her, but it had also given her the strength to endure. She looked at her little garden, the one she had almost given up on, and saw tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. Even the flowers come back, she whispered. Maybe love will too. That day, she decided to write one last letter to Lily, not to ask for anything, but to simply say thank you for giving her a life full of purpose. Because even after the longest winters, hope has a way of blooming again. Alina spent that afternoon pouring her heart into the letter. Every word felt like a goodbye, yet also a soft embrace across time. She wrote about her memories, the sleepless nights when Lily was sick, the sacrifices she made to send her to college, and the unspoken prayers whispered through every hardship. But she also wrote about forgiveness, how love wasn't about keeping count of who forgot or who left, but about remembering why you cared in the first place. When she sealed the envelope, she pressed it against her chest and whispered, I love you, my girl, always have, always will. She never mailed that letter. Instead, she placed it inside her favorite book, the one Lily used to read as a child, so that one day, if she ever came back, she would find it there waiting. Because some words are meant not to be sent, but to be found when the heart is ready. A few weeks later, the doorbell rang, softly at first, then again, more urgently. Alina's frail hands trembled as she opened the door, and there stood Lily, her eyes red, her arms full of flowers. For a moment, neither spoke. Decades of distance, of silence, hung heavy between them. Then, without a word, Lily dropped everything and fell into her mother's arms. The years melted away, the pain, the misunderstandings, the loneliness, all vanished in that one embrace. I'm so sorry, Mama, Lily whispered, her voice breaking. I should have come sooner. Alina smiled through her tears and held her close. You came when it mattered, she said softly. For the first time in years, her house felt alive again, filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of a bond being healed. Because sometimes love doesn't need perfect timing, it just needs the courage to come home. That night, after years of emptiness, Alina sat beside her daughter by the fireplace. They laughed, cried, and spoke about everything they'd left unsaid. Lily read the letter her mother had hidden in the old book, and by the time she finished, tears streamed down her face. You never stopped loving me, she whispered. Never, Alina replied, smiling faintly as she rested her head back against the chair. The flickering firelight painted soft shadows across her wrinkled face, and in that moment she looked peaceful, as if her heart, after all these years, had finally found its home. The next morning, the house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't lonely. On the mantel lay a single note in Alina's handwriting: Don't cry for me, my dear. I lived fully, I loved deeply, and now I rest softly. Because love doesn't end with goodbye, it lives on in every heart it ever touched.